afternoon, or evening, depending where you are. Welcome back to another class. Welcome back, Mohammed, Althea, Ismail. Welcome back, everyone. Today class will be presented to you by Paula. And remember that after the presentation, we will have a round of questions if any of you want to participate. So now, without further ado, you can start, Paula.
Hi,
Please go ahead.
everyone. Hi, and welcome to today's session. And today we're going to focus on a practical but essential component of research, which is survey data collection tools. Surveys are one of the most widely used methods of collecting data in social sciences, healthcare, business, and education. And as you remember in previous sessions, we have covered how we can develop surveys, what is important. And now we are covering the topic of these data collection tools, which is another important part because of how you actually collect the data. And in this lecture, we will not only explore different tools that you can use to design and administer surveys, but also discuss the principles behind choosing the right tool and ethical considerations that you must keep in mind, as well as the pros and cons of popular platforms such as Qualtrics and Google Forms. So let's begin. So again, a little recap of previous times. So why surveys? Well, surveys are popular because they allow us to gather data efficiently from many participants. They use standardized questions, which makes responses easier to compare and analyze statistically when you get to the data analysis part. They are also flexible. You can distribute surveys online, on paper, or even as part of an interview. And because of this, surveys can serve both descriptive purposes, such as describing a public opinion, and inferential purposes, such as actually testing hypotheses. Survey tools can be broadly divided into traditional and digital. Traditional approaches will include paper-based questionnaires, telephone interviews, or in-person surveys. And these are still valuable in settings where internet access is limited, and maybe in populations such as older people who are not so prone to using technology. Digital tools, on the other hand, include platforms like Qualtrics, SurveyMonkey, and Google Forms. So those are the three most popular ones that you have probably also heard of. And these allow rapid distribution and automatic data entry. And sometimes researchers will use the mixed mode approach, for example, offering both an online version and a paper version of the same questionnaire to maximize inclusivity. So not all survey tools are created equal. And when choosing a tool, you must think about the ease of use for both you and your participants. Customization will also be important. So can you adapt the design, add any logics, or tailor any flows to your survey? And of course, data security is critical, especially for sensitive information and healthcare research. Costs of such can also vary dramatically, from free platforms like Google Forms that maybe you already have used, and to premium institutional licenses like Qualtrics. And finally, you must look at what happens after data collection. So can the tool export already to Excel in a standardized form? Or maybe it can already export to a software such as SPSS or Stata. And you must also see if it provides any built-in analytics. And of course, paper surveys may seem outdated, but they still have their place. They are familiar to many populations and don't require internet or any devices. This is particularly useful if you're studying in rural or resource-limited settings. However, here we also have clear disadvantages. So you will need to enter the data manually, which is time-consuming and prone to error. And printing can be costly as well, especially if you're printing in large amounts. But however, you shouldn't overlook this method because it is reliable when digital is not possible, like I said, in rural settings or with an older population who do not have devices or the capability of using a device. And now we can zoom into the most common tools that you will most likely use. I have most experience with Qualtrics and Google Forms, so I will show you these. And we will not only look at what they offer, but also see how to actually use them. So here's an overview of Qualtrics. It is the gold standard in academia and industry. And here you can see how the dashboard of Qualtrics looks. Qualtrics has a good way that you can use it freely as well for a limited amount of responses. So I think it's 500 responses. So if you know that your survey is not going to collect more than 500 responses, then you can use the free version of Qualtrics, or you can ask your institution, maybe a company you're working at or your university, if they have a license for Qualtrics, and then you can collect unlimited amount of surveys at the same time and unlimited amount of participants. As you can see on the screenshot of the dashboard, I only have one survey here, but of course you can have more. And here you can see the status of your survey, which for me is currently closed, which means that I finished my data collection after I collected 404 survey responses. And you also see the last modified and creation date. So it's very easy to navigate when you log into Qualtrics. And one strength of Qualtrics is that it has a wide range of question formats, which may not seem important at the beginning, but when you start developing your survey, especially if you're using a validated instrument, as we spoke about in previous classes, then you will see that it actually comes in handy. You can add multiple choice, ranking, sliders, and matrix questions. And this flexibility helps you design surveys that are tailored to your research goals. So you can look at your research questions, think about what validated instruments you're going to use, or perhaps you've created your own questionnaire, and you can pick the appropriate question types. And what is really nice is that you can use different types of them. So you don't have to do the whole survey multiple choice. You can do a few questions multiple choice, then you can use a matrix, and we will look into how that looks as well. And another feature that I want to point out that is actually important in Qualtrics is called skip logic, which allows you to ask inclusion and exclusion criteria questions and skip to the end of the survey if the participant does not meet the inclusion criteria. And yeah, now we're going to look at how some of the question types look, and I will use examples from my survey so you guys can see that. So we have firstly multiple choice, the simplest type of question. And you can see here I put in question 3, which was people had to pick their ethnicity, and question 5, they had to pick their employment status. As you can see, there's different types of, let's say, box or circle for picking. So question 3, the people were only allowed to pick one ethnicity that they were. Whereas question 5, why it has the box instead of the circle, is that they were allowed to pick 2 or 3 employment statuses, meaning, okay, I had the response option that they're retired or retired but employed. But for example, if a person was unemployed and pursuing higher education, then they were able to pick the 2. Or maybe they were unemployed, retired, and pursuing higher education. So this is important for some of your questions to think about if you can allow these multiple responses in a multiple choice question, or you want to limit that to one. So it is important at the stage when you're developing your survey to think about if you are responding, is it important that they can only choose one option, or maybe they can choose more than one option, as in this employment status case. And further, these are the matrix questions that I already mentioned. And actually, these are my favorite type of questions when it comes to validated instruments with a Likert scale. As you can see on the slide, I used the SDM-Q9 validated instrument to measure patient perceptions of shared decision-making in Parkinson's disease. And instead of making each of the 9 questions separate, I could have done that. I could have made 9 separate questions and made the multiple choice answers from completely disagree to completely agree. I built them all into this matrix table. As you can see, it's a very compact way because I was able to put all 9 questions in this one pretty table, and the respondents could very easily click for each question on this Likert scale, which answer corresponds to them. And this was only possible because all 9 questions had the same Likert scale response options. In this case, it was from completely disagree to completely agree. And with matrix questions, we can easily reduce participant response fatigue, as they can respond to, in this case, 9 questions in a very efficient way, instead of having to click through 9 separate questions. So if you remember from previous classes, we talked a lot about how we can decrease this participant fatigue. And this is one really easy way to do that with online surveys. Because also when I fill out a survey, I would rather see such a table in a compact on one page where I can click my responses in maybe a few minutes versus where I have to click through maybe even several pages of those questions where essentially it has the same scale. So why would I need to do that? And this is much more time and energy efficient for the respondent. And here you can see the skip logic feature that I also mentioned. So this is a good feature to use if you are first checking for inclusion criteria before letting participants participate in the rest of your survey. For example, I was recruiting patients with Parkinson's disease and healthcare providers for my study. And as you can see in this inclusion criteria question, I asked if they are patient, healthcare provider, or none of the above. So if none of the above was selected, then the participant would be taken to the end of the survey. And this is why it says skip to end of survey if none of the above is selected. And in a way, these participants were not able to participate. And this was important to do because otherwise you can get responses from participants who do not meet your inclusion criteria at all. And if that happens, you're going to generate garbage data. It is true that some people will try to participate in a survey even though they don't meet the inclusion criteria, purely because they didn't even read what the survey was about. Maybe they didn't even pay attention to the consent form and what was written in there, and they will just try to participate. And some people might even come up with answers just to participate in a survey. And this will unfortunately generate you garbage data, which will not be useful for your study at all. So it's important, if possible, to ask these inclusion questions. And for example, I also had further inclusion criteria questions, not just this one. Another one was that I needed to make sure that the patients resided in the United States and that the healthcare providers practiced in the United States. So my next question was that accordingly for patients and for providers. And if they responded that they do not reside or practice in the United States, then they would also be taken to the end of the survey and not participate. And in a way, this not only saves you from garbage data, but it also saves people who don't pay attention to what your survey is about from wasting their time on it and essentially for you to be excluding the responses, because you could have had this question without the skip logic, but then you will exclude those responses from people who selected none of the above anyways. So there's no really point of collecting those responses. And this is why it's really good to put in such skip logic in Qualtrics, or in other platforms it might be named something else, but it is a really useful part of the tool. And once your survey is complete, Qualtrics lets you export data directly to Excel, SPSS, or Stata. And responses are automatically downloaded, and you can include metadata such as start time, completion time, or even dropout rate if you're interested in that. And on the further slides, I will show you how the data looks after export and after I clean it up after exporting it. One thing I still want to note here is that sometimes you can see that Qualtrics also allows you to export maybe even into a software already, such as SPSS or Stata. But if your data is not just numerical data, then you need to export it into Excel and you will need to code it. And this is what I'm going to show you how I did mine. So this is how my data looked at export. As you can see, it is quite messy. And of course, it cannot be given to a statistical software looking like this, because the software only understands numerical data, meaning numbers. So therefore, each data had to be converted, or as I like to say, coded to numbers. And this way, for each question, we assign a number to a specific response. For example, I would take under sex that everyone who's female will be assigned 0 and male will be 1. And for example, further for age group, the 18 to 24 years will be 0, and 25 to 34 years will be 1, and 35 to 44 will be 2, and so on. And the same would happen for the further questions, including the Likert scale, where it was from completely disagree to completely agree, where I would code it from 0 through 5. And what is important to remember here, that all your data must be a number. So for example, if it says 18 to 24 years, don't just code the 18 to 24, but also just the whole thing. So there's just a number in that cell and nothing else. There cannot be any words because statistical softwares do not understand words. They only understand numbers. And yeah, as I just also mentioned the codes, I like to make a so-called code book in Excel on a separate sheet where I put down, so as I said, female, male, 01. So you can easily have an overview of what you coded without forgetting it. Some people like to write it down on a piece of paper. That is fine as well. I always make it in Excel. I can make changes afterwards, but as long as you know what you coded, because after you analyze your data, you will be seeing these numbers and you will have to make interpretations based on them. So you must know what you coded with what number. So don't make that mistake of forgetting what you coded. And this is how the data looks after it's been fully converted and coded to numbers. As you can see, I've also deleted anybody who did not consent to participate or who was excluded due to not meeting the inclusion criteria. And now I just have nicely mostly full responses. As you can see in row 2, somebody answered only the demographic questions from being a patient or a provider to region, and then they did not answer the further questions. That can sometimes be fine. This comes back to missing data, how you're going to estimate it or you're going to exclude it afterwards. That can be decided later. But as long as you get to just numbers and your data is cleaned up, that is already wonderful, and your statistical software can digest this. Further, we're going to look at Google Forms. This might be interesting to all of you who want to make sure that your research project for the survey is completely free. Google Forms is 100% free, no matter how many questions you add on it. And it is very perfect for quick surveys, also for pilot testing or any class or dissertation projects. So I have a screenshot here of a survey that I'm currently collecting responses in. It is in my native language, Latvian, as I'm studying regional disparities in Parkinson's care in my home country, Latvia. I chose Google Forms here because people in Latvia know this platform better than Qualtrics. And as you can see, it's not only your researcher side of choosing the tool, but you must also think about the population you are collecting in. When I collect responses in the United States or more globally, I'm not afraid to use Qualtrics because most people are aware of it. But I knew that in my home country, Latvia, people are less technology prone and also they are not so up to date with the modern technology. So Google Forms is a more common thing to be used in any research performed there. And I just wanted to make sure that I am doing the same. And Google Forms is also very easy to share. You can just share the link with all your participants. And it also integrates with Google Sheets if you don't want to use Excel. Google Forms doesn't have advanced branching like Qualtrics and also doesn't have so many question types, but it covers most common needs, including linear scales and text responses. It also has the ability to check inclusion and exclusion criteria and skip to the end of the survey if a participant does not meet the inclusion criteria. Here it is not called skip logic, but something else, and we will look at that as well. And in the next slides, you will see examples from my questions in Google Forms. So these questions are not in English because they're in my native tongue. However, you will understand the main point. And as you can see here, it's the same as in Qualtrics. You can make the participants choose one answer or multiple answers. So here on the left, I have highest education level, and here person can pick only one highest education level. Whereas again, on the right is the employment status where they can pick multiple employment statuses. And sometimes you want to ask a multiple choice question, which will be a yes, no, or not applicable. And when the participant would respond with yes, then you want them to provide additional information, which would be maybe qualitative data that you can include in your survey. Or potentially if multiple participants mention the same thing in this like long text answer, then you can also code it and still use it for statistical analysis. But in this case, you ask the multiple choice question, and in the next question, you give the option to provide any qualitative insights. Here, I had a whole list of non-pharmacological therapies that the patients with Parkinson's could do. So there would be physiotherapy or ergotherapy, logopedy, speech therapy, and they were able to mark if they've been referred to those treatments. And then this question asks, did they go and actually, participated in those non-pharmacological therapies? So the answers were yes, no, or that they were never referred. And here I had the further question was like, if they answered no, can they provide a reason why they didn't participate? And then a lot of participants said it was the cost, or they had to travel too long, or they were not interested. So if they would provide these answers and multiple participants would have the same answers, then you can still code them and use them as quantitative data. But of course, if the responses are maybe very lengthy or they're just different for each participant, then you can use them in your manuscript as qualitative data, saying that many participants were referred, but they chose not to take the referral into account, so they did not participate in these therapies. And main reasons were that they had to travel more than, let's say, 50 kilometers, or that the costs were too high and they couldn't afford it, or that they didn't have a relative who could take them to these therapies. So you can mention it in the qualitative way in a narrative in your manuscript as well. And one thing I really like about Google Forms is that it presents your responses as graphs already at the data collection phase. So as you can see here, I had 49 responses at the stage when I took the screenshot. The next day, I already had 55, and it keeps updating these graphs. And I have never done that yet because I'm currently writing the paper that I've done this Google Forms collection on. But these graphs could potentially be used in your paper or your dissertation, or at least they could be used as examples for making your own diagrams. So maybe you can see that you like this pie chart, but you want it to be different colors, or you want the legends to be different. For example, I would not be able to use this for my manuscript because the responses are collected in Latvian, but I would be writing my manuscript in English. So I would just use this example and make my own pie chart in Excel. But I think this is a really good starting point, and it kind of gives you an idea of how it has to look. And when using survey tools, of course, we come back to ethics and ethical considerations because they must always be a priority. Participants should give informed consent, as we've discussed before. Surveys may seem harmless, but you still need consent that the participant clearly understands the purpose of the study and that they are participating voluntarily. At this stage, you must decide whether your responses will be anonymous or confidential and communicate that to the respondents. If you choose to collect any participant identifying information, such as their IP address or their email address, their contact information, then you must state that clearly also in the consent form and in the description of the study so the participants are aware. But most of the time, to avoid any bias, you will be collecting responses anonymously. And maybe at the very end, for those participants who want to provide contact information, you will say, if you want to provide it, you can. And you should ensure that your survey tool complies with data protection standards if you are located in an area and doing the research in an area where that is applicable. For example, the gross data protection rules, which would apply for me here in Europe. And finally, you would avoid any leading questions or biased wording, which could distort your results. And I mean, this is something that we also covered previously, but you should just be aware of it at every point of the development of the survey so that you don't get into problems later when you come to data analysis, when you stop data collection and realize that you did something wrong, because then you cannot publish your research. And here's an example of an online informed consent form. I use the template that my university has provided me with. As you can see, it's quite lengthy. It's longer than I used for previous surveys previously, but I think it's much better because it's written in a very easy way for the participants to understand. And here I just redacted the names and information of my colleagues, but you can see most of the important information. Um, I like this as well because they always say that the informed consent form must be written in a level that an eighth grader would be able to understand. Because there are obviously some people who might have a lower literacy level and they might not be able to understand highly educational, complicated information. So you have to take that into consideration when you're writing this consent form. And another good thing about this one is if you see like under the participants, it's starting to ask like questions like what will I do in the study? And then it answers that, saying that if you agree to join the study, then we ask that you participate in a survey. So it's very like answering any questions that you as a participant might have in this very direct way. And it's very important to also provide your email address or any additional contact information because there might be people who are not entirely sure if they want to participate. Like they might not understand the actual goals of the study, even though they're explained there, they will have additional questions. So it's important to do that. I myself, for every survey, get multiple questions from people just wanting to clarify, like, is this going to be published or are we going to see the results afterwards? And that's another thing about research that I would suggest to all of you. If you perform research and after you conduct the data analysis, especially when you publish, that you share it with the same population of people that participated in your survey. It can be really helpful. People are really thankful for that, that they feel like they participated in your survey and that it meant something instead of just answering a few questions that you maybe forgot about or never did anything further with. I always do that. So I recruit my participants through patient support groups or through maybe like hospitals and stuff. So I always send my published work to them and I'm like, in this date I asked you to participate in my survey and thank you for doing that, and now I've published my work, so please share it to anybody who would have participated so they can see that what they're doing is actually leading to a bigger good than just the information getting lost somewhere. And yeah, this is a further part of the actual informed consent form. So at the end of the form where it's explaining what exactly they're going to consent to, there is this statement of consent. And they say that by clicking I consent at the bottom of this page, I acknowledge, and then there are those most important parts, being 18 years of age, understanding the information about the study, had the opportunity to ask questions because there was also contact information, and that they agree to the use of the study information as described in the consent form. And once a participant consents, they can participate in the survey further. If they don't consent, it's going to skip logic to the end of the survey. And the participants who do continue, they've consented, they have the right to withdraw their consent at any time. So they might not finish the survey. They might email you and say, I no longer want to participate. And that is good. You cannot force them to participate. So that has to be taken into account. It's part of the ethics that they have the right of withdrawal. And best practices for using survey tools. So no matter which tool you choose, best practices apply. So you must always pilot test your survey. I think this is something we discussed in the previous lecture. When you create your survey, especially on these online platforms, it may be really important to see if you have set up the questions correctly. So did you put the star on each question that they must answer the question, that they can't just skip the question? Actually, really important part that I once forgot to do for some of my questions, and the participants skipped them, so I wasn't able to use my data. So you should be careful with that. And also, for example, for the multiple choice questions, if you correctly picked which ones have one option to answer, which one has multiple options, things like that. Secondly, keeping questions clear and concise. Very important for when you're collecting quantitative data, so you don't have, you can't be asking two things in one question and then giving the one scale. For example, rate your accessibility and let's say referral practices of medications. And then the participant doesn't know if they're supposed to mark the scale for the accessibility of the medication or for the referral practices of the medication from the doctors. Then track your response rates and consider sending reminders. Also very important, I think a lot of first-time researchers think that they will send out a survey once and they will get all the responses. In life, that doesn't work like that. People can forget, people can just ignore, especially the first time. So for me, I've always sent out at least 10 reminder emails. Of course, not every single day. You shouldn't do that. People will think you're terrorizing them, but you should do that over some time. I started doing that. So I sent my first email. I would wait like 2 weeks. I would send the second one in 2 weeks. And then maybe towards the end of the survey, the gaps would get a bit closer to each other. And also make sure you're not sending the same email that you sent the first time, but you make sure that you're acknowledging thank you to those who participated, but here is a message to those who did not yet participate. And what helps to put in those reminder emails is statistics. So for example, I need 80 participants. Right now, I only have 45. So please help me achieve the extra 35 people. Those are things that people actually take into account. So for the study in Latvia, I had to send reminders a lot, especially to the neurologists and of course also the patient. But eventually I managed to get to my statistical goal to meet my power analysis, but it was complicated. So it's not going to be easy, and you should be aware of that ahead of time and just come up with a strategy how you will remind these people without, of course, making them tired of your emails or thinking that you're being annoying. And finally, once the data are collected, you double check exports for formatting or any missing data issues, and you clean up the data just like I showed, make sure every single data is assigned a coded number, so it's numerical for you to begin your data analysis. And of course, strengths and limitations of digital tools. So digital survey tools have transformed research by making data collection faster and easier, as you guys also know. They allow for automation and instant access to global audience. Again, very important, especially if you're studying not just one specific small population, let's say a rural area in your home country, but you want to reach participants all over the world. But of course, they also have limitations. So they require internet access, which may not be, possible for some populations, especially living in rural areas where there's sometimes problems with electricity. They may exclude certain populations, such as aging population, as I also mentioned, and often face low response rates or non-representative sampling. Non-representative sampling would be, for example, if I send out this Parkinson's survey and I get a lot of young patients with Parkinson's responding to it because the older people were just not able to respond to the online survey. So unfortunately, those are things you must consider with digital surveys. And if it's really important that you get a more generalized sample, then I really recommend the mixed methods approach. And sometimes you can come up with a mixed methods approach that isn't so mixed as you might think it is. So, for example, I was recruiting Parkinson's patients through support groups and hospitals, and I sent the email to their, let's say, leader in the support group, and that leader let me know that they have some patients who are over 85 years old and are not able to use technology. So I came up with the fact that I could send them a Word document version of the same survey. They could print it out on their end, let the patient fill it out, and then the leader would scan it back and send it back to me. So it might be harder, especially for the person on the other side, because they have extra work with printing and scanning. But this is another option how you could still collect globally, remotely, where you're not, but at the same time also in different ways, not just online, but also on paper. And as researchers, we just must weigh all these pros and cons carefully and what we want for our survey, and to make sure that we're going to meet our power and that we will have as little study limitations as possible. So study will always have limitations, but you can minimize them as much as possible. And thank you for joining my lecture today. And I will allow for questions now. And if there's anything else that you want to discuss regarding research, you can email me anytime at the email address on this slide.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you, everyone. So let's go with the questions. Let's go first with CC Jules.
Thank you very much. It was a great presentation, as we expected to get this kind of session, the practice of survey from last session, past session. My question is, I have two questions. The first is, apart Google Form, how do you design your questionnaire, collect and analyze data? And question two, could you please explain technically how Google Form work from design stage to data collect, to export in Excel or CSV, and to data analysis stage? That's all my questions.
Okay, so Google Form, first you want to know how exactly you are going to make the survey in Google Forms. Is that what you are asking?
Yeah. There are two questions. The first is part Google Form.
Mm-hmm.
How do you design your questionnaire, collect and analyze data? Do you write it in Word? And and how do you deploy for surveyor to collect data in the area survey, area where we have to do survey in community, maybe because maybe the criteria is who has the how they call diabetes and so on, collect the data. So just to to describe, first question, apart Google from how to design your questionnaire, collect and analyze data. Second question is, could you please explain technically how Google form work from design stage, same thing, until analysis stage?
Mm-hmm. Okay,
Yeah.
so to answer your first one, yes, I first make my survey always in a Word document because I also send it to an ethics or IRB approval, and it must be in the Word format from the beginning. So if I'm using a validated instrument, I will put it in a Word document. I will work around it. I will maybe rewrite the questions so they're simpler to understand, adjust them for my population, and then afterwards I open a new Google form. If you're going to open one, it's going to just have a first question and then you can start adding multiple questions. And I just copy paste it from the Word into there. And oftentimes, as I'm pasting in, I realize that maybe I should be using a different question type than I originally thought. Yeah, collecting on Google Forms is quite easy, I would say. So from the participant side, you can also open it and see how your survey looks from the participant side. It actually goes like page by your questions, and you always have to click a next button. And as for the analysis, as I showed you, the one from Qualtrics, so it's a very similar format. You download it to Excel, or in this case, you can also download to Google Sheets, and then you just have to code the data manually, which is actually the longest part of any of your survey stage, I would say. For your second question, how Google Forms works technically, I think I mentioned some of the parts already. So you have to just manually insert the questions, make sure you're choosing the right types of questions, then also putting that you're requesting the participants to answer the question, because if you don't do that, then they can skip a question, which won't be good. So you always have to have, you've probably seen when you fill out surveys, there's like a star next to it. That means that they have to respond to it. That would be, I guess, the design stage. So make sure that everything is set up correctly. And to analysis, so the collection part, again, up to the participants, they will see the questions on every page. And the analysis, you're going to download it into an Excel, Google Sheets, or maybe CSV, depending what you like to use. And really much of the cleaning up data is just going to be manual. One tip I can give, when you're coding, let's say we're coding female, male, I will search. So on Excel, there's an option to command find, so search for female, and you can click replace all that it's searched. So it will search for all the female fields, and you will say replace with, let's say, 0. And then you can say replace all, and it will replace the whole column, which is a really nice feature in Excel to make it easier for you, especially if you have hundreds of responses.
Okay. Suppose so we suppose we have maybe 100 or 200 surveyors. So and you have to uh, deploy your questionnaire that you write in Word. So how do you do that?
Wait, do you mean we have 100 to 200 participants?
Yeah, we have 100 or 20 or 200 surveyors or yes, or participants. No, we don't have to confuse the people who has to answer question and the people who how they call own the questionnaire and asking question to the people who have to answer. We have I mean we have 100 like a team like surveyors who have the questionnaires and they have to ask question now to community, you know. So if you have 100 surveyors and you design your questionnaires in Word, do you write the questionnaire for every of for each of the surveyor, or do you write the questionnaire and you deploy on their kit, on the kit or like mobile kit, Android and so on? How do you do if we have more surveyors to out there to attend the questionnaire to the community?
So I think here it would again depend on what type of questionnaire you're using. So if you're using online, obviously you should make it just this one. Let's say I will make the questionnaire, and then I can give the link to all the other surveyors, and they can spread it out to their communities, and then the answers will be recorded in this one questionnaire, which is very good for online tools because then afterwards, when you download the Excel, all the data will be in one place. For paper surveys, also you must be careful. You should design the paper survey in the Word document, let's say. Even if you're working as a team, you can work on some Google Drive or something so you all see the document. But the final document should be the same one. So nobody of the other surveyors should be
Practical
using a
Google
different.
Toolbox, the similarly to Google Forms, can use also to deploy cloud is a cloud
Well,
tool and open source. But now you have to pay if you have 10,000 people to or 10,000 form to fill. You have a certain amount to pay. You have to pay a certain amount actually, but you have the free one and like the Google Forms also same thing. Very strong with a good lot of functions for survey that I want to just add as my contribution.
Yeah, and just to finish my point is that also when you're doing paper surveys and if you're multiple researchers who are collecting the responses, just make sure you're using the same final version of your survey so you don't end up with different responses if you use different types of surveys to administer, and that wouldn't be ethical for your research as well. So you have to use the one that was approved by the ethics board and the one that you and the researchers determined as the final version of the questionnaire. So no matter if it's online or on paper, it has to be the same one. The questions have to all be the same for all participants.
Thank you. Let's go with Ismail.
Yeah, good morning, Antonina. Good morning, the presenter.
Hi.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm trying to question before I not to let my. Will you be quiet? Be quiet. Okay, let me proceed. Now, my question is this. To what extent can future survey tools predict human behavior rather than merely recording it? And what risks will such predictive power pros to research ethics?
Could you please repeat that? I didn't get some part of the question.
Okay. Now, I will take it again. To what extent can future survey tools predict human behavior rather than merely recording it? And what risks will such predictive power pose to research ethics?
Okay, so do you mean using these survey tools to predict responses and data rather than just recording the data? Is that what you mean?
Oh, yeah. to predict human behavior too?
I'm not really sure I understood that part. So if you're talking about is this like AI related or?
Okay, can I take it slowly? I will take
Yeah.
it. Yeah, I will take it one by one. Yeah. To what? I'm sorry for the distraction. Okay. So, to what extent can future survey tools predict human behavior rather than merely recording it? Then another one, and what risks would such predictive power pose to research ethics or ethics? Sorry.
Okay. So about the human behavior, I guess that's a really good question that I actually have not given much thought to right now. But as to what we can see right now from my surveys, what I like about Qualtrics or also Google Forms, it's going to give you how long, for example, the person took to do the survey. So in one way, you can predict the behavior if they took the survey seriously or not. So if you're going to see a 30-question survey being filled out in 1 or 2 minutes, you know that they just clicked through. And most likely that response shouldn't be even considered for your data analysis. So those are those additional matrices that you can look at for human behavior to see if you should even include those responses in your data analysis, because sometimes people will really not take this seriously. They will just click through, and that means that they didn't even read the questions. They just gave some random responses. So you know that their behavior towards the survey was not what is to be expected of qualitative research, and therefore you should not be even including their responses. So I hope that that answers the first question in some sort of way. And as to your second question, I'm still not entirely sure what you mean, I guess, about
Okay,
the
this is
predictive
what I
power.
mean. This is what I mean. And what risks would such predictive power pose to research ethics?
That's a complicated question that I'm not sure I can really answer, but I guess still coming back to this research ethics, if we're talking also about the first part of your question about the human behavior, it wouldn't be ethical for us to include responses that were too fast or that were not seriously taken for the survey. And in this way, we are predicting what for our research to be ethical. So does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
ethics.
Let's go with Markrina.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Miss, for the presentation.
Thank you.
My question is about the order of questions that are generally seen in surveys. I am completing a survey on student achievement and parent involvement, and I want to know if it is a priority to put the demographic or descriptor questions first. Can I put them last? Is there some ethical rule that I have to put these questions to begin the survey? Because I noticed, well, I've realized that some persons in some surveys, especially parents, they don't like giving their information first, like, for example, let me see, their age or their ethnicity. Like, I do not know if they'll probably be more comfortable filling out all of the survey questions and then fill it at the end. What are your thoughts on that? Thank you.
Yes, that's a really good question. So thank you for that. I personally always put the demographic questions first. I think that it's a personal preference. There's no ethical rule for that. You can put them last. As you can see, you have your own observations that people might not want to provide this information at the beginning. And that is completely fine as long as you can justify it and as long as you keep it the same for all participants. So you're allowed to put it last. For me, I always included it in the beginning because it seems more logical when I get to the data analysis that I see my participants, if they were female, what age group, and all of that. But if you want to use your other questions or potentially a validated instrument first and then get to the demographics, it is totally fine. You can just name the let's say, sections of your survey. So you can have the name of the instrument, and then you can shift into the demographics.
Let's go with Alvin.
Thank you for the opportunity, and hi everyone. Thanks to, very much, Paula, for the presentation. I'm sorry I came in late, but what I got is very interesting. Permit me to read my question. English is not my first language. I was very amazed and like discovering that while preparing a survey, you can use tasks and add it to the questions that participants that are important for participants to respond. I never thought of it. It's a discovery, and I'm really like, wow. And I have a simple question. Does it work for, or is it allowed for any type of research, any type of survey, irrespective of the research design that you intend to use, qualitative, quantitative, or mixed method approach? Thank you.
Yes, so that's another good question. As I kind of mentioned in previous class and also this one, so if you are, I am focused on the healthcare research for Parkinson's, so a mixed method almost always makes sense. I think that you must consider mixed method between paper and online is not that big of a difference, especially if you will put the paper survey somewhere, people will fill them out and you won't know who's filling them out if you're doing an anonymous survey. But for example, in that case, an interview wouldn't work because you know the person that you're interviewing, you know their name, potentially you know how they look, so that's no longer anonymous. So those are things that you must consider. If you're doing an anonymous confidential survey, then this mixed method, especially with the interviews, might not always work. And of course, online in that way is the absolutely best because you have no interaction with anybody, whereas even paper surveys you might be interacting with. But that doesn't really matter in the area of which you're researching, but more to your specific research project and to whether or not you want your participants to know that you know them in a way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Ismail.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm grateful. I have another question. And the question is this: to what extent should data protection regulations, for example, general data protection regulation and health insurance portability and accountability act, influence the choice of survey tools in academic and professional research?
Okay. Well, I think that the examples that I gave you with Google Forms and Qualtrics, and there's probably also the SurveyMonkey that you've heard of, those are all designed around these data protection laws and regulations because they're widely used in the industry and academia, and they are of high standard. So when you collect the data, they will comply. They will not be collecting people's IP addresses or locations. This is why it's important to use these most known ones, not find, let's say, some maybe random tool through a simple Google search that maybe not many people are aware of, because those might not follow the rules. So these are like licensed and well-known softwares, which we can trust. When it comes to paper surveys, there you have to be more careful because it is a lot about your actions. So as I also mentioned to Alvin's question, it might be harder to, let's say, regulate data protection, not only with you knowing who is participating and potentially collecting their data, but how you're going to store it. So it doesn't end up that you lose the paper survey somewhere, you leave them in a public place where, I don't know, you were sitting in a cafe and you forgot them on the table, or generally how you're storing it, because computers are just more, I would say, efficient these days for all of us to collect data. We all have a password protected computer. It's standing most likely at home on the computer on the table, but maybe we're taking it with us. So it's like a safer place right now than these paper surveys are. So you must really be careful with that. So I prefer to do the following with paper surveys. If I collect them, I quickly enter the responses in an Excel, or just actually in the online form. I fill it out again and I submit the responses so they're recorded together, and then I shred them or burn them. So they're not laying anywhere around, even at home, where it could be found by somebody else, a third person. So
Thank you. And
yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
God bless you. Thank you.
Okay, let's go with Rose.
Hello, Madam. Good afternoon. Thank you for the presentation. Madam, you made mention of Google Forms. I want to find out whether is that the document we use to design our questionnaires or what?
So is that, you mean like where you originally designed it before you put it into Google Forms?
No, I want to find out because I'm not in that state anyway. But you were mentioning Google Forms, and I want to find out how do we use it? How is that related to our research?
I'm not sure. You were breaking up, so I didn't completely understand your question.
The Google Form, you made mention of Google Forms in our research work. In case you want to design a questionnaire or you want to send the questionnaire through the internet and you want to use the Google Forms, I'm asking whether the Google Form is it's like a spreadsheet that we use to design the questionnaire or what?
Yeah, okay, I think I understand. So if you are designing, or let's say you're making a survey instrument, you could use that, especially if you also want to test it immediately. So you could make it into Google Forms and then you can test it in a smaller population. But I personally still prefer to first do it in a Word document and then transfer it. But that could be a good way to pilot test a completely new type of questionnaire that maybe nobody has yet come up with. So you could directly make it in there and run a small pilot test.
Okay.
Okay.
So in the pilot testing, that one, do you use paper questionnaire or we go through the internet too? The pilot testing. So how do I go about it? Do I use paper to design the questionnaire and share it to us?
So it depends on the population that you want to run the pilot testing in, and for what reason you're doing it. So are you pilot testing a questionnaire that you developed, like completely new? Then you can choose. You can do a digital testing, or that if you're actually looking at if your questionnaire itself is working. If you are using already a validated instrument, but you want to pilot test your survey, then you have to just do it. For example, if you will make your Google form, then you have to pilot test to see if you made the questions correctly, and you will usually do it in a small